Recently I saw statistics for the most and least used Necromancer skills in Diablo 4, and if you look at the very bottom of the list, almost nobody uses Bloodwave and Bone Spirit. So naturally I made a build with both of them, and let's see how that turned out. Hi guys, I'm Asmo, and in this video I'll be showing you a full guide for my Bloodwave Necromancer build. The idea for the build came when I saw this legendary aspect and this unique chest. If you can generate a lot of blood orbs, you can use them to reduce the cooldowns of your ultimate ability while at the same time shooting out automated bone spirits. Bloodwave is an ultimate ability and it already spawns blood orbs through the Supreme Bloodwave passive, and if we use the tidal aspect, it fires not one but 3 waves, each of them spawning their own blood orbs for a total of 9. Add to it the aspect of the ultimate shadow for an insane 45,000 base shadow damage added to our blood waves, and you have a mega nuke skill with a moderately low cooldown. So does it actually work in practice? At first it was a little bit awkward to play because you have to understand how to manage your cooldowns, but after a dungeon or two you get the hang of it and it becomes incredibly fun and satisfying. And with the buff to the monster density, this build is perfect for melting gigantic packs of monsters, and I was easily doing nightmare dungeons with monsters 10 plus levels above my character level, and it can go much higher than that with careful playstyle. This build has a lot of really cool interactions that are worth knowing about, so I'm gonna go over my character and the build planner and quickly explain how this build works and how you can make it yourself. In terms of the skills, we're obviously using the Bloodwave. With some cooldown reduction, this cooldown is reduced from almost a minute to 40 seconds, and then we cut it in half by just picking up the blood orbs that come from the skill itself. After that, we have other ways of reducing the cooldown, so we can get it to practically nothing, and right after clearing a giant pack of monsters, you can use it again, sometimes even twice per giant pack of monsters if it's something like the huge packs in the Mercy's Reach dungeon or something like that. So Bloodwave is our main nuke, and we usually initiate with it if we have like a big pack. Then we have another way of doing damage, which is the Bone Prison. The Bone Prison does so many things for us. It traps the monsters inside. Sometimes you can have pulled them with corpse tendrils first, and then you have the Bone Prison. It makes them vulnerable. It generates essence. It gives you additional damage over time because we have an aspect that it gives us blight, and that blight makes the monsters slowed. Also makes them immobilized. This does so many things for us. Also spawns corpses like crazy. So this is how you're gonna be initiating on a pack of monsters if you don't have the Bloodwave. So Bone Prison. After that you have two options. Either just detonate these corpses with Corpse Explosion or Corpse Tendrils, just combo these and just spam that as the monsters are dying, or you can also go into the Blood Mist, which basically we have the Infinimist build embedded into this whole build, and we can just turn into the mist, detonate corpses, spawn more corpses, and just keep clearing like that. So we have 3 different ways of clearing, and if you somehow mismanaged all of your cooldowns, then you can have either Decompose or other basic ability. For example, you could use a Reap to spawn an extra corpse and then therefore start your chain from that. And that's basically the setup. Everybody is using Corpse Tendrils, so you should be very familiar with that. The one difference is that we are not getting vulnerable from Corpse Tendrils because we get it from the Bone Prison, so instead we're opting for the extra chance to spawn the blood orb, and that's basically the skills. Now let's go over the gear. I'm gonna go over every single slot. I'm gonna explain the aspects and also which stats are you looking for. So for the helmet, let's go first over the aspect. We're using the Disobedience. We're doing damage over time, so we're gonna be proccing it all the time, stacking it very high. It's very easy to keep up Disobedience with this build, so that's why we're using that. Naturally, we're also stacking a lot of armor, so it's gonna be very helpful. Then on the helmet itself, on the item, we're looking for cooldown reduction as a priority, and then you're also looking for life and armor, and the last can be damage after picking up a blood orb, or it can be something like intelligence or willpower. Both of those, or like all stats, those will be great, but the cooldown reduction is the most important thing. Then we have the Blood Artisan's unique. If you don't have that unique, this can be replaced for just a defensive chest piece, but with this you're looking for as low roll as possible on the blood orbs because you want it to spawn after you pick up the fewer orbs, not more orbs, so the lower number on the unique ability is actually best. And then it also gives us armor, ranks to Bone Spirit, blood orb healing, and damage after picking up blood orb, so this is all useful for this build. And for the gloves you have a couple of options. You can use the legendary with the aspect tidal aspect, And this aspect allows our blood waves to fire 2 additional waves, and that has so many benefits. Number 1, it triples the blood orbs you're spawning, so it's gonna lower the cooldown massively. Just after picking up the blood orbs, the cooldown is basically like 20 seconds. And if you do other stuff and if you hit monsters next to you because of the decrypify and stuff like that, you're gonna lower the cooldown even more. But that's one of the benefits. Another benefit is that you're also extending the duration of the shadow dot it spawns. Another benefit is that you get triple knockback, so it's more CC and the slow is longer as well. So it's tons of benefits on top of the fact that it just does more damage. And then if you're using the legendary gloves, you're looking for shadow damage over time, lucky hit chance as much as you can, something like all stats or int or willpower, and then lucky hit chance to heal is also very helpful to keep you up. And the other option is to actually use the unique gloves Howl from Below. This will be very nice because we don't really need the ranks from the gloves, which is usually what the legendary gloves are used for primarily. So we can use the Howl from Below, buff the damage of corpse explosions and make them like a homing missile with the skeleton, and that is really nice. However, we have to use a one-handed and an offhand setup for that because we cannot afford to lose any of the aspects that we have on this character. So we would have to put the glove aspect into an offhand, and then we would lose half of the effectiveness of the blighted aspect, which, as you can see, does insane amount of damage. So it could be potentially a damage loss depending on which skills you're evaluating, but it is an option. And because a lot of our damage actually doesn't come from the weapon, it is possible that it will be actually even a better setup. So you can definitely consider that if you have these gloves. Then we have the pants, and on the pants we have the defensive aspect of the embalmer, which basically whenever we consume a corpse, we have 30% chance to spawn a blood orb. Very useful. We just get more blood orbs on the field, they heal us, they give us fortify, and they also lower the cooldown of our blood wave. So it's just very, very useful, and it's great that we can put this on a defensive item so we free up the offensive slots. And then for the item itself, you're looking for ranks to corpse explosion as much as you can, and then 3 defensive stats. Could be life, armor, damage reduction, dodge chance, anything like that is gonna be good. Just no resistances. Then for the boots, we're using the blood mist aspect with which is explosive mist, right? Which basically turns our build into also an infinimist build. We can detonate corpses, we can spawn corpses, and we have the highest roll here, which is a 0.5 seconds cooldown reduction whenever we detonate a corpse with the blood mist. This is super useful. On the boots itself, you're looking for ranks of bone spirit, you're looking for movement speed, and then you can have a defensive stat like dodge, dodge against distant, dodge against close, damage reduction while injured, and also something like all stats or int or willpower will be also good. Next, on the weapon, we have the blighted aspect. Absolutely insane mental aspect. It's a 240% increased damage. Okay, this lady is spazzing out. 240 increased damage. It's absolutely insane. When you proc the Shadow Blight 10 times, and if you're clearing like a big pack, this is gonna proc, and so you're gonna notice sometimes your damage just triples, like it just goes insane, and that's gonna be when this aspect procs. It's absolutely massive. On the weapon itself, you're looking for all stats, you're looking for int, vulnerable damage, and damage to affected by shadow damage over time. You can also look for like damage to close, damage to distant, but there's not that many other good stats for this build on weapons. The amulet, that's always a difficult slot to get. The aspect that we have here is the aspect of the ultimate shadow. These, I have a bunch of them because these have different values depending on the level you get it at, right? Depending on the item level, they're gonna have different values. This is not even the highest value, but this gives me on an amulet 45,000 base damage. Why is it not on a weapon? Because it's already too much. Like, it already destroys everything. Once you, like, if you can use your blood wave, you're gonna kill anything. So the only issue is like if you don't have blood wave up, you want that damage to be higher, so you don't need to buff it even further. But on an amulet, it's a really nice spot for this because you're not gonna be replacing amulet very often. It's very hard to find upgrades for that. So you just have the highest roll you can possibly find of the ultimate shadow. I have the 45,000 on this one, and that is really, really good. And then on the amulet itself, you're looking for movement speed and cooldown reduction. Those are the most important things. And then you're also looking for ranks of corpse skills. The last modifier can be armor, can be damage reduction, can be some type of a damage, can be some type of a passive that is gonna increase your damage, anything like that is good. But the three main things is cooldown reduction, movement speed, and corpse skills levels. Then we have the rings. So for the rings, we have first the fast blood aspect, which reduces the ultimate cooldown whenever you pick up the blood orb. The best one I found is 1.4. 1.5 is going to be slightly better. There's a codex version, I think, that is 1 second, and with just the 1 second version you can still play this build, but it's of course better if you can get the higher roll. This build has a lot of aspects that has very big variability in terms of the rolls on the aspects, and I don't recommend playing this build until you can like assemble most of the parts of it, because it's not really something you want to level with. You just level with something else and then you transition to it once you have all of the aspects, which is going to give you a lot of time to get high levels of these aspects, like high rolls, and that's going to make the build feel much better. Like you can potentially double or triple your damage by just like better rolls on the aspects. And then on the ring itself, you're looking for maximum life, vulnerable damage, damage over time, and then you can get like lucky hit chance, you can have fortified generation, you can have damage over time, shadow damage over time, damage to crowd controlled enemies, stuff like that. And then the other aspect on the ring is going to be Bone Prison. Spawns a pool of blight that deals extra damage, and that's going to basically allow you to use blight without having it on a skill bar. Our Bone Prison basically uses blight, so we can use the blight passives, and I'm going to explain them when I get to the skill tree. But that's basically the gear. Now let's go over the gems and also the hearts, of course, which is a very interesting part. So for the gems, you're looking for the sapphires, damage reduction while fortified. You're going to be fortified most of the time. If you don't find yourself fortified most of the time, just use the rubies for extra life. Do not use the I think it's Topaz, right? The one damage reduction while crowd control, because you're not going to be crowd controlled because you're going to be using Blood Mist, right? So it's going to be basically useless. And then for the weapon, basically damage over time from, what is it, Amethyst or something, the purple ones, that's what you want to use. Don't use the one for, don't use diamonds for ultimate damage, because your ultimate already does way more than enough damage. You need to buff the damage of your other skills, not the Blood Wave. You need to buff the damage of Corpse Explosions and the Bone Prison and the Blood Mist, not the Blood Wave. The Blood Wave is doing enough damage. And now let's go over the hearts. So the Wrathful Heart is going to be the Creeping Death. This one increases damage over time by up to 50% for each different crowd control on the target. So that's gonna be, you're gonna have slow guaranteed, you're gonna have stun guaranteed, you're gonna have immobilize some of the time, and also you can have fear some of the time with the gloves, right? So the unique gloves are going to give you the chance to fear your enemies. So that's gonna be 150 to 200% increased damage, and then when the monsters are unstoppable or when the boss is staggered, which it's pretty easy to stagger bosses, it's gonna be 150% increased damage. So huge amount of damage over time. So the Creeping Death, very, very strong. Then we have the Sacrilegious. Of course, this is used in pretty much every single build. Automate the corpse tendrils, automate the corpse explosion. The cool thing about it is it also works while you're in the Blood Mist. So you're gonna be detonating so many corpses while in the Blood Mist. You're gonna be also pulling things together while in the Blood Mist. It's really, really incredible. And then we have the Decrepit Aura. I have one with 0 enemies near me with almost max duration, so I have like permanent aura, but all you need is just when at least one enemy is near you, gain an aura, and that's gonna be enough, because you don't care about like the aura whenever there are no enemies around you. You just need one that has at least like one enemy near you, and that's gonna be great. And the Decrepit Aura is very powerful, enables so many different things, and that is basically the heart setup. So now let's go over the sacrifices, because we are sacrificing all of our minions. So let's briefly just go over this. We're sacrificing Reapers for the 10% shadow damage. We're sacrificing Cold Skeletal Mages for the vulnerable damage, and we're sacrificing Blood Golem for the maximum life, because attack speed doesn't really benefit us that much. And now let's go over the skill tree. So the order doesn't really matter. You're going to be transitioning into this build once you have all of the skill points anyway. So we have an option of Decompose or a Reap or Hemorrhage. I think Reap is probably the best one, because you get the damage reduction, you get the instant corpse. Actually, if you'd have to put one more point into this, but you probably would take it from something like Fueled by Death or something. You'd put one more point into this for the extra corpse, and that's it. But you can also use Decompose if you don't want to spend those points. I basically never use this, like very, very rarely. If I use like all cooldowns and I have some like a weird rare mob that has like resistances to shadow damage and extra life and stuff like that. Sometimes it doesn't die, and sometimes I use all my cooldowns and I have to use this maybe like once every few dungeons, something like that happens. But usually you don't use the basic skill, it's just there just in case to generate extra corpse, or if you have really nothing to do, which is very rare. Blight, we don't use it ourselves, it's attached to our bone prison, but we have the chance to we have the 100% chance to slow. It just basically slows enemies, so we're applying this crowd control by default. And then we also have either chance to immobilize or the extra damage. The chance to immobilize is 30% chance to get 50% extra damage, but also immobilize enemies, which is pretty useful because sometimes the walls of the bone prison are breaking, or the supernatural blight, which just increases the damage without relying on the heart. So you can pick either one depending on which one you like. I prefer the immobilize for extra defensive aspect of this. Then we're using Hued Flesh. Lucky hits have chance to generate corpses. That's why we are using some lucky hit on our gear, in order to increase the amount of corpses we're spawning with all of our skills basically, right? So anything that hits enemies, Lucky Hit just has a chance to spawn corpses, and this is doubled against bosses, which is very, very nice. Just a must-have, and the Bone Prison procs this a lot. Then we have the Blood Mist. We're going for the Ghastly Blood Mist in order to generate the corpses. Very self-explanatory, only 1 rank. And then we have a Bone Prison, and the Bone Prison has 1 rank by default. However, if you're doing very challenging content, if you're doing like super challenging content, you can take points away from either Fueled by Death, or you can take points away from Bone Spirit. You can literally just take points from this, put them in this. This is gonna make your Bone Prison stronger if you're going for more of a playstyle where you're hitting stuff from distance because you are super under leveled compared to the content. Then this might be worth doing. It's gonna increase the health of the Bone Prison and make you safer. And of course we get vulnerable from this and extra essence, which we don't care about actually. Then we got Grim Harvest, only 1 point just to enable the Fueled by Death for extra damage, and then Corpse Explosion as high level as you can, and Blighted Corpse Explosion for the shadow damage over time. So this is gonna be one of our main sources of damage, Corpse Explosion. Then for the Decrepify, we have to put 1 point in this in order to spec into Enhanced and Abhorrent Decrepify. This one is gonna reduce our cooldowns whenever we're hitting enemies that are nearby. So what I do is I usually jump into a pack of monsters while in the mist, dealing damage to them all around me. They're cursed, so they're gonna basically reduce the cooldowns of my skills, and then I can immediately cast my skills again. It's just like an endless loop of reducing your cooldowns, and this is very powerful. Then we have Tendrils. For Tendrils, we're picking the Blighted one for the extra Blood Orb. If you find yourself that you don't need the extra Blood Orbs, you can also go for the Vulnerable. This could be good for some kind of a single target combat. And then we have the Bone Spirit. You can have either 1 rank in it just to spec into the extra crit, and the cooldown reduction is actually not necessary at all for this, so you can do that, or you can just have 1 point in it, or you can have 5 points in it, depending on how much you notice this doing damage for you from the unique armor. At lower levels this is a little bit better. The higher level you're pushing, the less effective it becomes. And then for the shadow passives, we're using 3 points in the Reaper's Pursuit for movement speed, which is awesome. Like anytime your build can benefit from that, you're happy, because Necromancer is pretty slow normally. Then we have the Gloom for extra damage, then we have Terror for extra damage, and then we also have the Crippling Darkness for extra chance to stun. You want at least 1 point in this. More points do not increase the chance for the stun, but they increase the duration of the stun. So if you are doing super challenging content, maybe you want to increase that. Then we have the Blood Wave, naturally with all the passives for the Blood Orbs and also for the slow. And then we have Stand Alone and Memento Mori, because we are sacrificing all of our minions, so we just increase these bonuses. And of course Shadow Blood, which will be proccing, and it enables Insane Aspect that we are using. Now let's go over the Paragon. So the Paragon is pretty straightforward. We're using 5 boards, including the starting board, and we're using every single actually legendary node on these, which is pretty rare. Normally most builds don't use that. But for this one we're using it, and we're using the newly buffed Wither. So Wither is going to be doing more damage now. Patch 1.1.1 is buffing that, but let's go just in order. And of course this will be in the description, so you will be able to just copy this setup as it is. So first we're using the Blood Drinker, which is giving us bonuses to these generic bonuses like damage, armor and stuff like that, but most importantly it gives us the Fortify, and that helps us be a little bit more tanky. The Fortify from of our Blood Orbs is very useful. Then we're going into the board called Flesh Eater. The Flesh Eater gives us 40% increased damage for 6 seconds after consuming 5 corpses, which is gonna happen in combat all the time. You see like a little buff above your character's skills, and you can very easily keep track of that. And then we're also using the exploit glyph here for generic damage increase. This is going to increase our damage to anything that's going to be trapped in the bone prison. And then from this one, I'm branching off to two different boards. The first one is the Wither. So this one, of course, increases our shadow damage over time, and there's so many nodes, like so many rare nodes for shadow damage over time that we're picking up because we have a lot of points to spare in this build. And then for the board, for the glyph, sorry, we're going for the Scourge. So this is basically just shadow damage over time increase and increased damage to enemies affected by it. And then on the bottom, we're going to Scent of Death. This is a node that takes very few passives to get to, so it's very much worth getting, and we get either 15% damage reduction on or 15% increased damage if we have no corpses nearby. Super useful. And of course, we're using the Darkness glyph. Again, increased shadow damage, and minions, whenever minions deal shadow damage to an enemy, the enemy deals reduced damage. And I'm pretty sure this works with the Bone Prison, because Bone Prison, the one with spawning, is gonna be dealing shadow damage, and it also counts as minions. There's so much weird coding going on with the Bone Prison. Bone Prison is like the silent hero of most Necromancer builds right now, because it does some crazy procs, counts as minions, and it's just like very, very weird. But yes, that's what we're using here, and we have just generic bonuses of like damage to injured enemies, and we have armor and intelligence, stuff like that. And the last board is the Blood Begets Blood. So this one is a little bit longer to pass to. It gives us up to 15% multiplicative damage bonus for 5 seconds whenever we're picking up Blood Orbs. So we pick up Blood Orbs all the time in combat. As you're fighting things, you're picking them up. So you're gonna have this bonus up all the time. And then we're using the Control glyph. So because we're crowd controlling enemies so much, we're gonna be doing increased damage to them. So, and also have like a multiplicative bonus against slowed enemies, which is gonna be anybody in the Blight pool spawned by the Bone Prison. And that is basically all you need to know about this build. Hopefully you learned a lot, and hopefully this proved a point that the meta is made up and you don't need to play meta builds. Whether you're playing Diablo, Path of Exile, or any other build, most likely the meta is just the trends. It's not necessarily what's the strongest right now. People really need to get out of the mindset of trying to learn the meta, and instead they should learn the game. When you learn the game, you can do fun stuff like that, and you can just play whatever you like. And this is really, really powerful, and surprisingly powerful, considering this is like the two least used skills in the game, and we're making the build around them, and it just smashes the content, and it feels so fun to play. And nobody is doing that, but hopefully this will open the eyes of some people that you can actually have a lot of fun. You can make creative builds even in a simple game like Diablo. So hopefully this was educational and fun. Thank you so much guys for watching. Subscribe if you like the video, and see you next time.